Today's lesson will cover Chapter 12, Key Issue 3 and 4. The first key issue will cover where business services are distributed, looking at first the hierarchy of business services, then business services in developing countries, and then economic specialization of settlements. Business services are clustered in global cities, and they include financial institutions, corporate headquarters, law, accounting, and other professional services. Financial institutions are centers for finance. Global cities attract these headquarters of the major banks, insurance companies, and specialized financial institutions where corporations obtain and store funds for expansion of production. Corporate headquarters are in global cities because obtaining information in a timely manner is essential in order to buy and sell shares at attractive prices. A lot of work and decision making is done in the offices within these global cities. Lawyers, accountants, and other professional services are clustered in global cities to provide advice to major corporations and financial institutions. For example, advertising agencies, marketing firms, and other services are concerned with style and fashion located in global cities, can help corporations anticipate changes in taste and help shape those changes. Global cities are defined by a combination of factors on their importance, not just their size. They're commonly centers of large thresholds or ranges of consumer and public services. Some of these factors include economic factors, political factors, cultural factors, infrastructure factors, communications, and transportation. Take a look at figure 12-20 located on page 442 of your textbook. Global cities are centers for the provision of services in the global economy. London and New York are the two dominant global cities, and they're ranked as alpha++. Other alpha, beta, and gamma global cities play somewhat less central roles in the provision of services than the two dominant global cities. Cities ranked alpha++ and alpha+ are labeled on the map. In addition, you will see other global cities on the key on the map as well. However, they are not as high ranked as the alpha++ or the alpha pluses. One question that I get a lot from students would be, is Folsom considered one of these global cities? And the answer to that is no. They would actually not even be indicated on this map by one of the key categories. Sacramento, on the other hand, would be, but it would be much lower on the ranking of hierarchy. Take a look at figure 12-21 located on page 443 of your textbook. This map indicates global cities in North America. Atop the hierarchy of business services is New York, followed by Chicago, Los Angeles, and Toronto. The next category of business services are services that are available in developing countries, particularly with regard to offshore financial services for taxes and privacy. Small countries, usually islands and microstates, exploit the circulation of global capital by offering offshore financial services. Offshore centers provide two important functions in the global circulation of capital. First, with taxes. Taxes on income, profits, and capital gains are typically low or non-existent. Companies incorporated in an offshore center also have tax-free status, regardless of the nationality of their owners. The U.S. loses an estimated $150 billion in tax revenue each year because companies operating in the country conceal their assets in offshore tax havens. Another reason that businesses will take on the services in other countries, particularly developing countries, is due to privacy. Bank secrecy laws can help individuals and businesses evade disclosure in their home countries. Corporations and people who may be accused of malpractice, like doctors or lawyers, or the developer of a collapsed building, for example, can protect some of their assets from lawsuits by storing them in offshore centers. This can also happen with wealthy individuals who want to protect their assets in a divorce. Some places that are notorious for these offshore financial services include islands in the Caribbean, Hong Kong, and Switzerland. Businesses may also outsource a lot of their locations for the following reasons: low wages and the fact that populations in other countries may have English speaking ability. For low wages, most back office workers earn a few $1,000s per year, higher than wages paid in most other sectors of the economy, but only 1/10 the wages paid for workers performing similar jobs in developed countries. For the ability to speak English, many developing countries offer lower wages than developed countries, but only a handful of developing countries process large labor forces fluent in English. In Asia, countries like India, Malaysia, and the Philippines have substantial numbers of workers with English language skills, which is a legacy of British and American colonial rule. Major companies like American Express and General Electric have extensive back office facilities in those countries. The ability to communicate in English over the telephone is a strategic advantage in competing for back offices with neighboring countries, and particularly in developing countries. As you can see in Figure 12-23, located on page 444 of your textbook, offshore financial service centers are mostly microstates or dependencies, and most microstates are small islands. India is a popular location for businesses to outsource their call centers. You can see the images above, and this represents low wages and workers that speak English. Settlements specialize in economic activities. The economic activities in a settlement can be divided into two types: a basic business, which exports primarily to customers outside the settlement, and a non-basic business, which serves primarily customers living in the same settlement. A settlement's economic base is important because exporting by the basic businesses brings more money into the local economy, stimulating the provision of more non-basic services for the settlement. For example, new basic businesses attract new workers to a settlement. The new basic business workers bring their families with them. New non-basic services are opened to meet the needs of the new workers and their families. Looking at talented workers, they are not randomly distributed. They are attracted to certain places because of job opportunities, and cultural factors can be considered most important as well. For example, some cities have a higher percentage of talented individuals like scientists and professionals. Attracting talented individuals is important because these individuals are responsible for promoting economic innovation. They are likely to start new businesses and infuse the local economy with fresh ideas. Figure 12-26, located on page 446 of your textbook, shows that settlements specialize in different economic activities. For example, in San Jose or the Silicon Valley, you've got computer software. In Las Vegas, it's gaming. In Detroit, it's auto equipment and parts. In New York City, we've got financial services, advertising, publishing, and multimedia. And in Dallas, we have real estate development. Looking at Figure 12-28, we see that Boston's economic base of biotechnology leads to returns for other businesses. Many businesses related to educational institutions, products that serve biotech, and specialized services may serve this one particular industry well. In Figure 12-29, the map shows that scientists and professionals cluster in some U.S. cities more than others. Figure 12-30, also located on page 447, shows that Richard, Florida found talented professionals preferred cities ranked high in coolness by POV magazine. To some extent, talented individuals are attracted to the cities with the most job opportunities and financial incentives. But the principal enticement for talented individuals is cultural rather than economic. Florida found that individuals with special talents gravitate towards cities that offer more cultural diversity. He used a coolness index and combined the percentage of the population in their 20s and the number of bars and other nightlife places per capita, and the number of art galleries per capita as well. Notice that both San Francisco and Sacramento are considered cool, but San Francisco is ranked just a bit higher than Sacramento. The last key issue has to do with why services are clustered in settlements. We'll be looking at services in rural settlements, services in early urban settlements, the percent of settlements that are urban, and the size of urban settlements. First, there are two types of rural settlements. Clustered settlements include families that live in close proximity, and their fields surround a specific settlement. It's usually circularly clustered and could also be linearly clustered. There are also dispersed settlements, which are isolated farms, especially reflected in the United States. Take a look at figure 12-31, located on page 448 of your textbook. This picture shows a circular rural settlement. It's a kraal village, also known as Boma, in Tanzania. Figure 12-32 shows a linear rural settlement in Quebec, which follows the French long lot tradition. Again, you see that the settlement is very much located along the river. Figure 12-33 shows a clustered rural settlement in Newfane, Vermont. Clustered rural settlements were a characteristic of colonial New England. New England colonists typically traveled from England in a group, and they wanted to live close together to reinforce common cultural and religious values. Many New England towns still have a central common surrounded by the church, school, and various houses. Figure 12-34 shows an isolated farm in New Jersey, which is more typical in the rural United States. A dispersed pattern developed from the time of the initial settlement of the mid-Atlantic colonies happened because most immigrants to these colonies arrived individually rather than as members of a cohesive group. As people moved westward from the Middle Atlantic region, they took with them their preference for isolated individual farms. Land was plentiful and cheap, so people bought as much as they could manage. It's important to note where services in early urban settlements emerged. Looking at prehistoric urban settlements, this surrounded consumer services, which were likely religious, business services, which were conducted through the trade of foods, clothing, and tools, and public services, which included political leaders and defense networks. Following would be ancient urban settlements, and that included trading, public and consumer services, and they were reflected at the peak of the Roman Empire. Medieval urban settlements renewed the emphasis on trade and public services. Let's take a look at urbanization. It has two dimensions, the number of people living in urban settlements and the percentage of the population living in urban settlements. Urban settlements differ from rural settlements because of their large size, high density, and social heterogeneity. This means that they have a very diverse population in society. Percent of urban populations has increased, and it continues to increase as well, particularly in developing countries. Take a look at figure 12-40. The world is on average more than half urbanized. Developed countries are generally more urbanized than developing countries, but many developing countries are fastly growing. Figure 12-41 shows that urbanization has increased in both developed and developing countries, but at a much faster rate in developing countries. Urban settlements are growing larger, and more of the world's largest cities are in developing countries. They also have the fastest growing urban settlements in developing countries. Figure 12-42 shows that while developed countries are generally more urban as a percentage, most of the world's largest settlements are in developing countries. Figure 12-43 shows a map of annual growth by percent, and nearly all are in developing countries. Just to recap some important parts of Chapter 12, settlements are either rural or urban. Rural settlements, which specialize in agricultural services, may be clustered or dispersed. Few humans lived in urban settlements until the 19th century, and developed countries have higher percentages of urban residents, but developing countries have most of the very large cities.